Okay, there's a quick little review about what's going on in chapter 19, which is about the Industrial Revolution and the after effects, really, of the Industrial Revolution. So as you get into this chapter, this chapter is one of those that's pretty straightforward. A lot of you have probably been exposed to the idea of the Industrial Revolution anyway. The Industrial Revolution is a revolution. It's a change in the way things are done. Before, most goods were made in the home. They were small scale. You didn't see a whole lot of technology. Things were done the way they'd always been done. But you get to the Industrial Revolution, this drive for profit, for efficiency, will lead to a revolution in the way things are made. And it happens when we learn to master steam power. We learn to make better machines. We learn to use the machines to make our work more efficient. And when that happens, well, you have an industrial revolution. So it's usually dated to about 1700 or so. And this is when you start seeing England develop more textile making, which lowers prices, but also makes more goods available and more people are able to buy them, which generates profits. We get better iron. We get better techniques at making and improving our iron. Steam production allows, and really the development of the steam engine allows us to travel faster. You get better railroads. Okay, people start pooling their resources, and you get joint stock companies, and you get corporations. So things are moving from small scale to large scale. Things are moving from being made in the home by hand to being made in factories by machines. Now, ordinarily, you think, well, that's great when we start changing the way we produce things, okay? But what it does is it changes the nature of work. The workers now become unskilled. And as an unskilled, because all the skill is in the machine, and unskilled workers are always going to have the lowest wages. They're going to be the first fired. They're going to be the ones that work in the most unsafe conditions. And so as you move from home-based to factory-based, you also see people, workers, who lose really their ability to compete for wages. They lose their skills, and as a result, the Industrial Revolution creates a working class that is very much going to struggle throughout the Industrial Revolution. You're also going to see an increase in child labor because child laborers can be paid less than full-scale workers. You're going to see women being forced to enter the workforce because as a family, you may not have enough money coming in from just one person to sustain a family. So all of this is going to lead to the workers being in a very bad situation. There are no protections, during the Industrial Revolution like we have today. There are no safety regulations. There are no minimum wages. And so as a result, the economy and the supply of the workforce, the demand for the goods that are being made are what are going to set wages. And people with low incomes are going to suffer as a result. They're going to live in terrible conditions, in terrible housing. They're not going to have access to health care. Their children are not going to have access to health care. And so all of that will continue until, in England, for example, you get to about 1833 when the Factory Act began to regulate child labor. Because let's face it, if you were working in a factory as a child, you're not being educated. The results from this is that you're going to have attempts made by the educated classes, by the middle classes, in some cases, to try try to make things better, the workers are never going to be able to do it themselves. They're going to try to unionize, and that's not going to go very well because they are in such high demand, or workers are in such high demand and there's such a big supply of them. If you try to unionize, you'd be fired. But there are some thinkers out there that believe that there's a way to change the system, and that's where you get socialism from. So the idea is instead of having private ownership, you allow the government to take over the factories because there's no motivation for profit. And with no motivation for profit, the workers will see increases in wages and better working conditions because the profits that normally go to the owners would be redistributed back into the factory and back into the workers. So there are even people that believe this could create a utopia. There's even this idea of utopian socialism. So there are some people out there that believe that this can improve. Okay, then you end up with England leading the way. England really had a set of unique circumstances. It had a lot of raw materials. It had colonies. It had a navy. It had a supply of workers. And so in the beginning, England dominates the Industrial Revolution. As you get to the later part of the 1800s, you're going to see other nations of Europe begin to surpass England. Germany, Japan, and others are going to surpass England. This is also where we really get new technologies during the Second Industrial Revolution. You start moving to electrification, new communications, even the internal combustion engine. Okay, so the Second Industrial Revolution happens during the latter part of the 1800s. And as a result, you also get some new thoughts about the working classes as well, including the development of Marxism. Karl Marx, German philosopher, thinker, will, in 1848, along with Friedrich Engels, write the Manifesto, the Communist Manifesto, the Manifesto of the Communist Party, 1848. In it, Marx talks about how, in the current situation, Marx saw everything in terms of class conflict, that every great moment in history had happened because of class conflict. And so Marx believed that this current age was a conflict between the working class, which he called the proletariat, and the middle class, or the owning class, which he called the bourgeoisie. Marx believed that there was a theft taking place, that the workers were being stolen from, that this, he calls it the doctrine of surplus value, that the workers are making these products, they're being sold, and the profits are being distributed to people who did not make the product. The workers made the product, and so they are essentially being stolen from. Their profits are being stolen from them. So Marx believed that would eventually lead to a revolution, and the workers would seize control of the factories, would overthrow the owning classes, everyone would become a worker, and as a result, under Marx's views about, which is in some ways kind of borrowing from the old utopian socialists, that without a class conflict, there would be no need for government, and since everybody would be a worker, there would be no class conflict. And so after this revolution, we would evolve into a governmentless utopia where the workers controlled everything and everybody was a worker. The other part that goes along with this is that as nations began to industrialize, as they began to get stronger industrially, they began to compete with one another for resources, for colonies, for markets. And you're going to start seeing this when we start talking about imperialism later on. But in the meantime, as these nations start to develop, you're going to see one of the most powerful motivators for that development, that's nationalism. There are places in Europe, for example, that do not have a political expression of the people that live there. Germany is a great example. There is no Germany in 1850. Okay, we won't get a unified Germany until 1871. But there are a 39 or so individual German states in 1850, 1848, and they would all say they spoke German. They would all believe that they were German, but they don't have a German name. And so many of these areas in Europe are going to begin a quest to get a political expression of who they are. Germany is an example. Italy is an example. And we'll talk about those when we get to that moment. Okay. The other major forces, we used to call this, when I was in grad school, we used to call this the age of the isms, because so far you've talked about really industrialism. Now you're talking about nationalism, conservatism, and liberalism, and you can read those for yourself. And imperialism, and militarism, okay, socialism, Marxism. So all of these isms are this sort of, I guess, all of these ideologies are emerging as a response to the Industrial Revolution. And it's going to propel us into really an age of competition where we're going to end up fighting a world war as a result. So the text tries to take you through some of this, the beginnings really of some of these nationalistic sort of problems. You saw a revolution break out in France in 1830. You'll see another one break out there in 1848. You'll see Italy try to unify in 1848 and fail. You'll see Germany try to unify in 1848 and fail. Okay, so this is a period of time where after Napoleon, after 1815, the major European powers had said, we're not going to have any more revolution. We're not going to have any more of this revolution like we had during the French Revolution. And that's really, too hopeful, because what's going on with the Industrial Revolution, plus the nationalism that's fueling a lot of this, is going to lead to all kinds of problems. There's a Greek revolt against the Ottoman Empire. All right, well, they said no more revolution, but Greece revolts against the Ottoman Empire and wins its independence in 1829. There is a war that breaks out in 1853 between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. It's called the Crimean War. So we have warfare kind of returning. Okay, we have really Italy trying to unify, which it eventually does. When you get to this period and this point in your text, you need to make sure that you understand how unification of Italy is led by the Prime Minister from Piedmont, Cavour, who unifies northern Italy, while the freedom fighter Giuseppe Garibaldi unifies the southern part of Italy. Then they come together and eventually unite all of Italy except Rome. They won't get Rome until later. Same thing happens in Germany. It's unified by a prime minister named Bismarck. Bismarck will goad the French into a war in 1870. After really touching off a series of wars to help unite his state, Bismarck will unite Germany at the expense of Austria, who gets kicked out of a unified Germany. And Germany becomes an empire in 1871. The German Empire, when it is created, is going to upset the balance of power even more, because Germany is becoming so powerful because of the Second Industrial Revolution. It already has one of the most powerful militaries, probably the most powerful military in Europe on land. It may not be the biggest, but it is the best trained, best led, best equipped army in probably the world at this time. So you basically created a superpower when Germany unites and becomes the German Empire in 1871. This is going to put a lot of pressure on Britain and France. who are also embroiled in this, but they are also scared of Germany. France has just been pummeled in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, and which not only ended Napoleon III's reign in France, but also isolated France from the rest of Europe. And France is going to begin to look for allies because it is scared of Germany. England will too. Okay. Austria, despite being kicked out of a unified Germany, will tend towards its, because of nationalism, will tend towards its German neighbors. Russia is struggling. Russia will always tend to be behind the rest of Europe. So Russia is really struggling during this period of time. So their days of really being able to influence what's going on in Europe are coming to an end. In 1905, they're going to have a revolution. They're also going to participate in the First World War, and they're going to be one of the first powers to get out of the First World War, and it leads to another revolution in Russia, which will see the Bolsheviks take power in 1917, and Russia is going to very quickly become a communist nation as a result of Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution. All right, the chapter sort of ends by taking a look at some of the liberal reforms that are trying to take place, voting changes, participation in government changing, okay? But there are some attempts to reform, but there are also more radical things developing as well, including anarchism, okay? So in 1908, you're going to start seeing the siege, really, of the First World War, when Austria annexes Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908. That is going to lead to Serbia being very unhappy about that, drawing closer to Russia. And by the time you get to about 1914, you've divided Europe into two armed camps. And all we need is something to set it off, and we get it, and the First World War develops. All right, so that's it for Chapter 19. Make sure that you read that carefully. There's a lot of information in this chapter, so make sure that you sort that out as you take notes.